First alarm went off at 0340 station time, which is how I know Winston was already asleep on the Admiral's chair. He'd claimed it 40 minutes earlier, while the Vatheran security sea detail was still filing into the anteroom, and the Admiral himself was 3 corridors away being fitted for his dressage. Winston had walked in, assessed the furniture with the gravity of a 9-year-old Beagle, who has assessed a great deal of furniture, and chosen the chair at the head of the briefing table. He'd turned twice, lowered himself with a long exhale, and was snoring before the first security scanner cleared the doorway. I didn't move him. He wasn't hurting anything. Chair was going to smell like Beagle for the next 6 hours regardless. The security chief, a Velthian named Osrath Keln, noticed Winston on his first sweep of the room. He stopped, looked at me. I was seated against the wall with my transit bag, viewing the day's animal welfare compliance forms, and said, "What is that?" "That's Winston," I said. "He's my dog." Osrath Keln had 4 arms, 2 of which he used for tactical gestures, and 2 of which he appeared to use mainly for expressing contempt. All 4 were active now. It is a comfort animal, a therapy creature. This is a Tier 1 diplomatic briefing anteroom. He's not a therapy dog, I said. He's a Beagle. I'm the animal welfare attaché. He goes where I go. It is asleep on the Supreme Admiral's chair. Yes, I said. Osrath Keln looked at Winston for a moment. Winston's left ear twitched in his sleep, hunting something in a dream. The security chief made a sound I didn't have a translation for, and moved on to sweep the rest of the room, apparently deciding that a sleeping 9-kilogram dog did not rise to the level of a security concern worth escalating. He would revise that assessment at 0340. The alarm was a full station alert, the kind I hadn't heard in 8 months of joint postings. Platform's AI announced, in 3 languages simultaneously, that a Class 7 biological apex signature had been detected in the forward diplomatic wing. All non-essential personnel were to shelter in place. Security teams were to converge on grid coordinates that turned out, when I checked the annex map, to be approximately 12 meters from where Winston was sleeping. Osrath Keln came back into the anteroom at a run. He had a scanner in 2 of his hands, and a sidearm drawn in another, which I thought was a lot of equipment to bring to a room containing 1 human, attaché and a Beagle. "Remain still," he said. "There is an apex biological threat on this platform. We are conducting a sweep." "I know," I said. "It's Winston." He looked at me. He looked at Winston, who had not woken up. He looked back at me. "The threat signature is Class 7. That classification requires a minimum mass of 80 kilograms, a confirmed predation history across at least 3 prey taxonomies, and measurable neurochemical apex marker output. Your animal is 9 kilograms. 8.4, I said. He lost some weight after his dental work. Osrath Keln did not process this. He ran his scanner across the room in a slow arc, and the scanner made a sound I'd come to associate with a result it couldn't resolve cleanly, a kind of technical hesitation. He ran it again. Same sound. He looked at the scanner, then at Winston, then at the door, and then he called for backup and left. I went back to my compliance forms. For the next 2 hours, 4 separate security teams swept the anteroom. Each team's scanner flagged Winston. Each team's team leader looked at Winston, looked at their scanner, and called for a supervisor. Twice, teams cleared the room entirely, escorted me into the corridor, sealed the anteroom, swept it with full spectrum equipment, and each time the Class 7 signature was still there when they opened the door again. The 4th team found Winston awake and sitting in the middle of the floor, and 2 of the 4 security officers took a step back when he looked at them. He wagged once, slowly, and they regrouped, but it took a moment. Nobody touched him. At 0612, the Supreme Admiral arrived. Admiral Varexon was 2.5 meters tall, wore a uniform that had more metallic accoutrements than most of the furniture in the room, and had, according to the diplomatic briefing package, personally arbitrated 47 interspecies territorial resolutions. He came in with 6 staff, 2 of which were Osrath Keln's direct superiors, and he stopped inside the doorway and looked at the briefing table, where Winston had reclaimed his chair and was now grooming his left ear with 1 hind foot. "This," the Admiral said, "is the apex biological signature." "Yes, sir," said Osrath Keln, who was clearly relieved to have the problem elevated. Admiral Varexon looked at me. "You are the attaché." Darcel, sir. Earth veterinary intake. Animal welfare post, seconded to the mission. And that is your animal. Winston. Yes, sir. The Admiral was quiet for a moment. Winston put his foot down and looked at the Admiral with the patient, slightly mournful expression beagles use when they would like breakfast and have not yet received it. His tail moved once, slow, considering. Show us the threat, the Admiral said. It wasn't quite a question. I looked at Winston. He's right there, sir. The room processed this at different speeds. Two of the staff members exchanged a look. Osrath Keln's upper arms moved in a complicated gesture. The Admiral, to his credit, did not argue. He turned to his senior science attaché, a Kithian named Sorvith Ill, who had been silent in the doorway, and said something in the Velthian register I didn't catch. Sorvith Ill stepped forward with a piece of equipment that was significantly more serious than the handheld scanners the security teams had been using. It was a biometric disclosure unit, the kind used for formal threat classification, before weapons authorizations are signed. Seen them used on Kethian warbeasts during an incident at Vareth Station the prior year. I hadn't expected to see one in a diplomatic anteroom. I'm going to need you to allow the scan, Sorvithil said to me. He doesn't bite, I said. Well, he does, technically, but not right now. Sorvith approached Winston the way you approach something, when you know what the scanner said, and you're trying to reconcile it with what your eyes are telling you. Slowly, with awareness of your own footfall, Winston watched him come, decided he was not interesting enough to investigate, his chin back on his paws. The scan took 4 minutes. The disclosure unit was not designed to hesitate. It hesitated, running secondary checks, cross-referencing its own output, doing the machine equivalent of asking the question twice. When the readout came, Sorvithil looked at it for a long time before he turned to the Admiral. He read 3 lines from the display. I don't have Kethian technical vocabulary, but I understood the structure. Taxonomy, predation profile, neurochemical output. The 3rd line, which he read last and read quietly, was the apex marker index. The room was very still. Winston exhaled through his nose and thumped his tail against the Admiral's chair cushion. Twice is what he does when he wants to be acknowledged. I reached into my transit bag and produced a small cloth pouch of his breakfast kibble, because it was 0630 and he'd been patient about it. I set the pouch on the floor. He climbed down from the chair, carefully. At 9 years old, he takes the dismount seriously, and went to eat. The Admiral watched this. How long, he said finally, has Earth had animals like this? As long as we've had Earth, I said. Domesticated about 15,000 years ago, give or take. We've been walking them on leashes since roughly the same time. Varaksan looked at the chair Winston had just vacated. He looked at the biometric disclosure unit, which was still displaying its readout. He looked at Winston, who was eating with the focused, joyless efficiency of a beagle who has waited long enough for breakfast and is not going to waste time on atmosphere. These animals, he said carefully, are common on Earth. There are about 900 million dogs on Earth, I said. Various breeds. Winston's on the smaller end. Sorvathel said something to the Admiral in low Velthian. The Admiral's response was brief. Then he turned to Osrath Keln and said something else, and Osrath Keln left with his teams. The Admiral did not sit back down. He took the chair to the left of where Winston had been sleeping, the secondary chair, the one for the first deputy. He arranged his uniform and opened his briefing materials, and said, to no one in particular, we will begin the session in 20 minutes, which was the scheduled time, as if the previous 3 hours had been a minor administrative footnote. I appreciated that about him. Winston finished breakfast, licked the pouch twice to be thorough, and went back to the briefing table. He sniffed the leg of the chair the Admiral was now occupying, considered it, moved to the chair at the far end of the table, the lowest-ranking seat, the one assigned to me, turned twice and lay down. Sorvithil paused on his way to his seat and looked at this. Does he always do that, he said. He picks the warmest spot, I said. End of the table gets the most light from the viewport. Sorvithil looked at the viewport. He looked at Winston. He wrote something in his notes. The session ran 4 hours. Winston slept through most of it, woke for a brief period when the ventilation system changed pitch, determined it was not relevant to him and went back to sleep. At one point, A junior Kethian staff member who had come in mid-session with updated materials stopped dead when he saw Winston, and one of the senior delegates had to quietly explain something to him, and the junior staff member sat down very carefully in his assigned chair without looking at Winston again. In the closing portion, when the Admiral was reviewing the agreed points and the room was doing the formal acknowledgement sequence, he paused and looked down the table at me. Ache sullen, he said, "Sir, your documentation lists Winston's classification as domestic companion animal, non-tactical. That's correct, sir. We will be amending our intake screening protocols," he said. "Effective immediately. All Earth animals presenting for diplomatic transit will undergo biometric disclosure on arrival rather than on incident." "That seems sensible," I said. He nodded, once the Velthian version, and went back to the closing sequence. After the session, while the delegates were filing out and the staff were clearing the briefing materials, Sorvith Ill came and stood near me while I put Winston's leash back on. Winston accepted the leash with dignity, as he accepts most things. "I want to understand something," Sorvith Ill said. "You carry the scan results in your file, I mean, for transit purposes." "Yes," I said. "Every posting requires updated documentation. I have his vaccination records, his species taxonomy, his behavioral profile, and the biometric disclosure. That's in there too." Sorvithil looked at Winston. Winston looked at Sorvithil with the patient, faintly evaluative look he uses on strangers before deciding they are not a threat, which generally takes about 4 seconds. "You presented at intake yesterday," Sorvithil said. "You handed your documentation to the duty officer." "I did, and the biometric disclosure was in that packet." "It was on the 3rd page," I said. "Under species supplementary data, there's a summary line: Earth domestic canid, Class 7 equivalent apex biological marker index, non-aggressive disposition, leash trained, current on all vaccinations, standard language. We use it on all our working dog postings." Sorvithil was quiet for a moment. "No one read the 3rd page," he said. "No," I said, "they rarely do." Winston sat on my left foot. "He does that when he's ready to go, and I'm taking too long." I reached down and scratched behind his left ear, which he accepted as an acknowledgement but not as a substitute for departure. Sorvithil looked at the Admiral's chair at the head of the table, the indentation in the cushion still holding the shape of a 9-year-old Beagle who had slept there through a 3-hour lockdown, and he wrote something else in his notes. I didn't ask what it was. I had a pretty good idea. We left through the main corridor, Winston leading, me 2 steps behind the way he prefers it. The security officers we passed stepped aside without being asked. One of them, Osrith Keln himself, stopped and watched us go. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. Some things don't need to be said twice. Winston had said them already, mostly by sleeping through the saying of them, which is, when you think about it, the clearest possible statement.